perspectives into your life, into your beliefs. We're going to cover a lot of ground, and as I say, it has the potential to be quite charged, and it doesn't need to be. This is an open conversation. We've got an extraordinary group of leaders joining us today. So Nick probably has the hardest role of us all, being here as a former politician and technologist, as it were, with 3 religious leaders. So we're going to have fun, a little bit of fun perhaps, with the different perspectives on this conversation.
Oh, I like that you believe that the spiritual side of things is the easy bit of the conversation. I think that's the much more complex side of things, which I will leave entirely to the spiritual experts.
Well, is technology not in some respects considered a religion?
It shouldn't be, no.
Okay. We could also have a philosophical discussion, but perhaps we won't. Although, as I mentioned earlier, there was a gentleman who came up to me after the first session to ask about objective truth. And maybe that's a conversation that we can also have here. What is objective truth? Over lunch, we were all discussing whether there is one truth. Is it one truth or many truths? And how do you perceive truth? Perhaps I suggest, while we wait for His Excellency, so Nick, would you mind just starting us off? Do you want to be at the panel?
Sure.
Or
Sure. Up there.
If you'd like to at the podium.
Yeah, of course.
Podium. Can I also just, apologies again, just to say, for His Excellency, you will need your translator. One, I believe, is the English translation, 2 is the Arabic.
Yeah.
So Nick, sorry for...
Well, it's a joy to be here, a great honour, and this subject, as you quite rightly said, is a vexed and difficult and deeply interesting one. I would like to just focus my remarks to sort of get the ball rolling with 2 assumptions. Firstly, that the good news is that my view, as I will explain, is that misinformation in the digital age has in fact proven to be more manageable and less impactful than is often assumed. But the bad news is that what is likely to come in the era of generative AI will pose very profound dilemmas about what is true, what is not true, what is artificial and synthetic, and what is human and authentic, at a scale and posing challenges the likes of which I don't think we've dealt with before as a society. So on the first bit about misinformation, the first thing I would say, and I say this as an ex-politician, as a former senior executive in Silicon Valley, is that the semantics of this are quite important. Most academics, technologists and governments now make a distinction between disinformation and misinformation. And what they broadly mean is that disinformation is illicit, sometimes illegal behaviour, the use, for instance, of networks of fake accounts to actively seek to disrupt elections, for instance. So Russian interference in elections is considered to be disinformation. These are organised attempts, often sponsored by states and others, to use the way we consume information in the online environment to actively disrupt the democratic process. That's not what I'm proposing to talk about, because I don't think it's the subject of what we're talking about here. What I believe we're focused on is misinformation, which is a whole lot more complex. Because misinformation is half-truths. Gossip is misinformation. Every day you can pick up a newspaper and see headlines, glaring headlines, which are a form of misinformation because they exaggerate one thing or ignore another thing. Almost all political rhetoric is full of misinformation as politicians wildly amplify their own virtues and wildly exaggerate the vices of and the failings of their opponents. There's nothing new about misinformation at all. All of us, every single person in this room, I guarantee you have in some shape or form propagated, repeated, or originated some form of maybe minor, minuscule, vanilla-like form of misinformation. It is part of what it is to be human, to talk nonsense, not to provide the full picture, to slant facts in the direction which you like rather than the person who you disagree doesn't like. That is actually at the heart, and that is why it's so complex. Because there's no law which says all misinformation is illegal, because it would be absurd to make it illegal, because you'd be seeking to make the human propensity to exaggerate, to provide only half the picture somehow illegal. And that's why it's such a fraught issue. One person's misinformation is another person's right to talk nonsense. Misinformation changes over time. Notably, remember during the COVID pandemic, the assertion that the pandemic or that the virus, that the COVID may have originated from a lab leak or a leak from a laboratory in China was considered to be misinformation. Until some years later it was determined to be maybe the truth. So what is true and what's not true? What is half true, what is half untrue, what is half... It is an extremely fraught area. And into this, of course, you insert these technologies which have connected us all in a way which is almost without precedent since the dawn of time. There is nothing new, therefore, about misinformation. What is new in the internet age is the virality of misinformation, is the distribution of misinformation. There is nothing new about people, human beings. That's in the end where the content comes from. The content doesn't come from an algorithm. The content comes from human beings. Then the question is how it's distributed. And there is definitely some evidence. Just like that old, do you remember that old saying that, you know, a lie makes its way halfway around the world before the truth has got its boots on? There is some information that some of these algorithmic systems seem to boost or accelerate the viral distribution of misinformation in a way which is not always applied or doesn't appear to manifest itself for other forms of content. That's again partly to do with human nature. We like, this is the awful truth, we like misinformation. We like lurid headlines. We like gossip. We like mischief. We like people saying, critical things of each other. It's deep, deep in human nature. We mustn't pretend it's just some technological thing. And if only they did a tweak to the algorithm, suddenly everything would be nice. We're not nice. Human beings are not always nice and never ever have been. Here's the interesting thing though. A lot of the research that has been done, the academic research that's been done over the last 2 or 3 years, shows a number of quite striking things. Firstly, that as a proportion of the total content on the internet, misinformation is still actually relatively small. There is not a day that goes by where I don't pick up a newspaper and see someone pontificate, the internet is awash with misinformation. It is statistically not true. So, for instance, the company I used to work for, I don't know anymore, it's not quite misinformation, but it's adjacent to it. I think the prevalence of hate speech on Facebook today is around 0.02%. So that means out of every 10,000 bits of content that you might find, if you scroll endlessly on your Facebook feed, you might find 2 bits of hate speech. I wish it would be 0, it's never going to be 0. By the way, 0.02% is still a lot of a very, very large denominator number, but you take my point. That's the first thing, is that it's worth keeping the sheer quantum of this in some perspective. The second interesting thing that a lot of research has shown is that the effect of misinformation on people's behaviour, how they think and how they act, appears to be much, much looser and more complex than people sometimes assume. There is sometimes this techno-deterministic assumption that if person X sees post Y on their feed, they're going to vote like A or B. In fact, thankfully, most of the research suggests, I, for instance, initiated when I was in Silicon Valley, probably the most sophisticated research project, bringing together 11 universities across the United States, running real-time experiments through the 2020 US election to really try and understand empirically the relationship between people's use of social media and voting behaviour. Things like virality, things like algorithmic ranking. I can explain all the science behind this in the discussion. But the interesting conclusion from most of the papers that have been published by the academics, and of course I'm simplifying this somewhat, is that the effect of what people see on their social media feeds in that very large, widely credible study was much, much weaker. It just didn't have as much of an impact on political and voting behaviour as you might imagine. It's been well established by academics, for instance, that there is almost no causal link between the use of the internet, the use of social media, and levels of polarisation. There are some societies where the use of social media has gone up, polarisation has gone down. Some of the communities where polarisation, as measured by social scientists, has gone up, is amongst, interestingly, parts of the population that use the internet least. The elderly, for instance, people who don't have a university education, and so on. So that, I hope, provides some thought-provoking perspective on this, in my view, sometimes very loosely debated subject of misinformation. Having said all of that, however, I would just want to conclude with a slightly more gloomy assertion, which is, I think, whilst I would never suggest that if time stopped now that I would urge you to be complacent about misinformation, I certainly would urge you to sort of apply a degree of perspective to it in the way that I described. I don't feel the same about the future, because I think generative AI is a whole different ballgame. We will very soon be experiencing in our online lives such an overwhelming prevalence of synthetic, artificially created, generative AI content, some of it purely synthetic, some of it hybrid, some of it part human, part synthetic. I think very, very quickly it will basically be impossible to tell what is authentically human and what is, in effect, imposter content. And certainly the time that I was in Silicon Valley, I was being subject, people like me were being subject to label and watermark and flag to people when something is generated by AI. That is impossible. The scale of this is far, far greater than that. You can't play whack-a-mole by applying a little label to everything that is generated by AI or partly generated by AI. So I leave you with this final thought. His Excellency and myself were talking about this earlier. How about doing the reverse and using, for instance, blockchain technologies to verify and authenticate non-synthetic, non-AI content? Because that is the precious content for truth and for human connection that we will need to hold on to, and that content, in my view, is the content that we should be able to flag and identify in the future. Thank you.
Bishop Carey, do you want to give us some comments?
Thank you. Good afternoon, my dear fellow human beings, and grace and peace be with you all. I am Bishop Carey from Church of Norway, a Lutheran Protestant church which ordains women and organizes the church in accordance to democratic ideals. I was elected the President of the European Council of Religious Leaders in September last year, and I'm really honored to be with you. And I have already learned a lot this morning, and I feel inspired, and actually with a greater hope for our common world. So thank you very much from the deepest of my heart. And we are all here today to examine our collective responsibility to challenge disinformation and to protect democracy and democratic values and to rebuild trust. And the first I want to address is this. Is it possible for religious leaders like us to play any role at all in matters like this in our time? Due to strong and aggressive secularization and due to the problem that religion is very often being instrumentalized and politicized and used to divide and split people and societies, it seems like the space for us religious leaders to engage in political or social or society questions has narrowed, and we are often being put on the sideline and silenced. So again, thank you for inviting us. On the other side, some religious leaders are being completely swept up in specific political agendas, which makes it impossible to keep integrity as religious leaders. We need to make sure, as religious leaders, to have the right distance to political authorities and stay faithful to our tasks. In Norway, in a recent opinion poll put through by my church, it became clear that what most of our members wants and expects and likes us to do, likes to get from the church, is that we take care of rituals, services like baptism, confirmation, marriage, and burials. And the church, we are always doing this, all of that, with great care and seriousness, and it is immensely important for the church. But the churches and the religion's tasks and callings are broader and bigger than this, and I strongly believe that religious leaders from all religions can make a huge positive impact on society as a whole. And the problem with disinformation and how that weakens democratic values and makes democracies and trust crumble as such. And engaging in these issues is closely connected to the commandments of Jesus to love God, to love your neighbor and your enemy, and to do good to all people. Having stated that, how can religious leaders challenge disinformation and rebuild trust and protect democratic values? I think we need to utilize good values and virtues. Number one, we can lift up and build hope in times of increasing hopelessness. We can strengthen spiritual and existential contingency preparedness by talking about what gives meaning to life, what is important in life, and how we can manage when life is being cruel to us and hope is fading. We can teach people to pray and to have faith in the future, because our hope is anchored in something bigger than ourselves, in God of love and mercy. Number two, we can keep on building open, inclusive, physical communities to break the pandemic of solitude, which drives humans to spend endlessly amounts of time scrolling and searching for entertainment of any kind. In order to weaken the impact of this information coming to us through the phones or the screens, we need to look up, to see each other's, be together, and lead friendly and honest conversations with each other. So we can encourage people to have faith in themselves and in the other. Hence we believe that all people are created in the image of God with an inviolable value. Number three, we can contribute to building respect for the dignity of all human beings in a time where me first prevails. We need to strengthen the common empathy and compassion for all human beings, to bring forth and lift up love of neighbor, or sisterly or brotherly love, as a basic value for humanity. Because we are all called to love one another. Number four, and we, religious leaders, should step outside of our holy houses and contribute to building bridges between people and lead by example. Religious leaders from different religions, denominations and traditions, doing good things together is a strong witness and a strong message of trust and solidarity, bringing faith, hope and love to the world. Therefore, my assertion is that us religious leaders can and should be playing an important role in challenging disinformation and protect and nurture democratic values and rebuild trust, and we do it best if we do it together. If you ask me if I am optimistic about the situation of disinformation and distrust, I have to say, maybe, not always, because it's difficult to see anything with my eye that should make me very optimistic. But friends, I always have hope. I'm always hopeful. And I will end my opening remarks by quoting what the Apostle Paul wrote in his letter to the newborn church in Corinth, the 2nd century in our time, or after Christ. He wrote, "And now, and still now, these three remains, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love." I believe we need to act in hope, have faith in each other, and nurture love for the future. Thank you.
Bishop Carey, thank you for those wonderful words. Chief Rabbi, do you want to introduce a few thoughts?
My distinguished co-panelists, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank the Oslo Centre for planning and staging this exceptionally significant conference here today, and it is an enormous privilege for me to participate in it. At the very dawn of human life, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, an explanation is given of how God created our world. God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let us create humans in our image." God says this and God said that. On 10 occasions, the Almighty made a statement. And in that way, with words, he created our world. So the Talmud asks, surely God easily could have just created the world. Why all these statements? And the answer is, in order that we human beings for all time should know that words have the power to create and words have the power to destroy. 10 generations later, after the first phase of human life had failed, and when Noah became Adam marked II, while a sample of all life existed in Noah's ark, God stated, "Sahar ta'aseh la teva," which means, use your words in order to transmit light into the world. Words have the capacity to create light, to produce joy and happiness. But words also have the potential to create darkness, sadness, tragedy, and destruction. The medieval great Jewish scholar Shlomo Ibn Gvir said, "Before I say a word, I am its master. After I say it, I am its slave." And how much more so is that the case today with the printed, published word, where at the tap of a single button, our words are conveyed right around the globe. Today I believe we are facing a double moral emergency. One which relates to disinformation and the other which relates to hatred, and sometimes the two merge together. If we just have a look at one subject, for example, and I'm sure you will understand the reason why this is so desperately important for me and my co-religionists, let's look at anti-Semitism. Hate thought can easily be translated into hate speech. And hate speech is just one step away from hate crime. When 2 months ago, a murderer took the life on the streets of Washington, D.C., of 2 members of staff of the Israeli embassy there, it became proven beyond all doubt that that heinous crime that he performed was a direct result of what he had read on social media. And if we look today at the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust in the UK has issued many statistics, but I'll mention just a few. If you look at the levels of anti-Semitism before the 7th of October 2023 and what transpired later, for example, in just 8 months, from October 23 to June 24, the number of anti-Semitic comments online rose 115-fold. During that period, if you look at the beginning of October 23, the number of likes on X, formerly known as Twitter, for anti-Semitic comments was 18,700 during that month. But in June of the following year, it rose to more than 24 million in a month. That's a rise of 1,300-fold. Anti-Semitism is simply just going through the roof. And the way that it is being expressed on social media seems to just be on a journey without any control of it whatsoever. So within this context, what can be done, what should be done with regard to social media and all online content? First of all, we should be insisting on safety by design. Instead of companies being excited about a new product, a new feature that they can roll out, and they do so, and then find out only at a later time about the damage that it has started to cause, and then they're looking for the solution, we need in the first instance, with regard to each and every feature and product, to ask this critically important question. Has it got the potential to cause harm? And if it has, what can we build into the system before we roll it out to prevent such harm? We need to appreciate the extent to which once the genie is out of the bottle, it can't be put back in. And we have a responsibility in that regard. We need to also appreciate the power of AI. Let me give you an example. On the 29th of July, last year, we're coming up now to the first anniversary, there was a heinous crime committed in Southport in the UK. A young man entered into a dance class. Lovely, young, happy participants, and he murdered some of them. And then there were rumors about the identity of the perpetrator, as a result of which mosques were attacked. And I, together with many faith leaders, called out and said, that's not the way for us to behave in the UK. We need to strengthen our social cohesion. And all houses of prayer are sacred places. And there were 5 of us. I, together with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Roman Catholic Cardinal, and 2 senior imams, jointly wrote a letter to the Times, calling for an end to these attacks on these mosques. But then, about a month later, a video went viral. It was a video which showed a BBC report about me calling for the closure of all 1,500 mosques in the UK, followed by some awful Islamophobic comments that I was purported to have made. And then within a few days it became clear that this video was professionally produced with AI in Russia as a direct attempt to destabilize social cohesion in the UK. And on my way here this morning, we checked. It's still up there. It hasn't been taken down. This is the power of a tool which can be so productive and such an enormous blessing for our society being abused in such a horrific way. And then we also need to focus on human involvement in the oversight of content. I do understand the arguments behind objectivity and engaging AI itself to monitor and to oversee. But we need to have human beings with a conscience, with a feel, to actually be involved. And the more human inclusion in that oversight, the better it is for the guaranteeing of responsible content. As my final point, we need to ensure that critical thinking will be right at the heart of our children, who will be the adults and the leaders of the next generation. They need to be taught how to know what the real facts are. We need to arm them with the tools, with the capacity to differentiate between authenticity and that which is fake. To understand the difference between truth and falsehood. To be able to determine what is responsible and what is irresponsible. Because if there is no differentiation, not only are they in their future in trouble, but our entire planet will also be. King Solomon in the book of Proverbs declared, Chaim v'mavet b'yad halashon, life and death are in the hands of the tongue. The pen is mightier than the sword. The keyboard is perhaps the strongest weapon in the world. It is in our hands to determine whether we use it, God forbid, for destruction, or for the wonderful purposes of enhancing life and making this world into a better place. That is our responsibility, and let us guarantee it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi. His Excellency.
Flash. Grazie il flash.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسعدني أن أزور أوسلو الجميلة هذين اليومين للمشاركة في هذا المؤتمر المهم والحيوي، مقدرا لمركز أوسلو هذه الاستضافة. أقدر أيضا كثيرا فكرة هذا المؤتمر ومساهمات المتحدثين المتميزين، وأحب أن أركز في كلمتي على أن هذا الحضور بهذا التنوع الديني والفكري والسياسي والإعلامي يعطي رسالة مهمة، وهي أن عالمنا يختلف بطبيعته، وأن هذا الاختلاف لا يعني حتمية الصراع والصدام بين هذا التنوع، أو يعني على الأقل الخوف أو القلق من الآخر الذي نختلف معه، ومن ثم البعد عنه. مثل ذلك الوصول في بعض الأحوال مع الأسف إلى مرحلة كراهية الآخر والتحامل عليه، وربما رفض الحوار معه، كما تفعله بعض الأفكار الدينية والسياسية المتطرفة، ومنها مع الأسف دول وكيانات عزلت نفسها فلم تمد يدها إلا لمن يتفق معها سياسيا وفكريا، بينما هي ترى دول وكيانات أخرى من نفس مجموعتها الجغرافية والسياسية والثقافية تختلف عنها في الوعي والحوار والتفاهم وحكمة التكتيك ومن ثم التأثير. لقاؤنا اليوم هو أحد النماذج التي تؤكد على أن عالمنا المتنوع يتلاقى ويتحاور ويتفاهم ويتعاون، بل ويتحالف، وإلا لحكمنا على تنوعنا بالصراع والصدام الحتمي والخلافات المنغلقة والأخطاء الميؤوس من علاجها، كما هي أفكار بعض أتباع الأديان والأحزاب الفكرية والسياسية، بل وبعض التوجهات الإعلامية مع بالغ الأسف. وينشأ عن ذلك مع الأسف تصعيد عداوة الاختلاف، كما ينشأ عن ذلك أحيانا المعلومات المضللة، سواء كانت عن سوء فهم بمعنى بدون قصد أو كانت عن عمد، وهي بدورها تزيد من التوتر والصدام والصراع. ومع التقدم المادي والمذهل في كافة شؤون حياتنا، إلا أن هناك تراجعا في القيم والوعي. وكمثال، هل يمكن أن نثق بمعلومة أو رأي يأتينا من مؤسسة إعلامية أو مركز أبحاث يحمل توجها سياسيا أو فكرية متطرفة أو منحازا لتوجه أو أيديولوجية معينة. ويكفي أن أصف تلك المؤسسة أو المركز بالتطرف عندما يقصي غيره ولا ينقل للآخرين إلا ما يتفق مع توجهه، ثم هو في ذلك يدعي الحياد. صنعت المعلومات المضللة بنوعيها المشار إليهما، ومنها المعلومات المبالغ فيها أو المتطرفة في مفاهيمها وتقاريرها، صنعت حاجزا خطرا بين التفاهم والتعاون بين الأمم والشعوب وحتى داخل الدولة الوطنية وحدها. بل إنها فاقمت من الخلافات وعمقت من التحديات ونشأ عن ذلك مظاهر خطرة نشاهدها كل يوم. لم تنفع معها المؤتمرات ولا التصريحات ولا البيانات التي تفتقد للروح، نعم تفتقد للروح والمعنى، ومن ثم تفتقد للمصداقية التي لا يمكن أن نجدها إلا بالأثر الإيجابي الملموس. من المهم أن ندرك أنه ليس بالضرورة أن تنتهي جميع خلافاتنا إلى حلول كاملة أو إلى قناعات تامة، بل يكفي التفاهم ببعض النقاط الكثيرة لسلام عالمنا ووئام مجتمعاته الوطنية. ومن هنا تأتي أهمية قيمة التسامح والاحترام المتبادل والصبر، أيضا الصبر والحكمة. وبناء عليه نقول لا للفهم الخاطئ بخلافاتنا، ولا لبعدنا عن بعض بسبب خلافاتنا، ولا للحوارات غير الجادة، ولا للتسرع بالقناعات والانطباعات إلا بعد التحقق من صحة المعلومات والاطلاع على السياقات والأسباب والظروف. ومن هنا نقول أيضا لا للتضليل الإعلامي والذي صور ديمقراطية عدد من الدول من خلال الدفع بمرشحين مغلفين بالتزوير الإعلامي وبروباغندا الدعايات المضللة والوعود الكاذبة لتدفع الشعوب المختلطة في هذا التضليل ثمن ذلك غاليا، وهو مع الأسف في سياقنا المعاصر في أسوأ أحواله وأشدها تصعيدا وتضليلا. كما لا ننسى التضليل في تشويه سمعة المنافسين السياسيين والإساءة في ذات السياق للمعنى الجميل للحريات. وليس هناك من شيء تم انتهاك سياده الأخلاقي في عصرنا الحديث مثل الحريات. ومن هنا نستطيع القول بأن عددا من الدول الكبرى في عالمنا تحولت إلى ساحة صراع وطني مقلق بسبب ذلك التضليل الذي لا يحمل أي قيمة أخلاقية، ليتجاوز التنافس من أجل الأمة إلى صراع من أجل الحزب والفوز، مرورا بالتشبيه المتبادل غير الأخلاقي بين المتنافسين. كما نقول أيضا لا للتطرق في القناعات والانطباعات، بل وسيلتنا نحو أهدافنا المشتركة هو الوعي والحكمة في التفاهم والتعامل مع الجميع. فنحن نريد كسب الآخرين وإصلاحهم لا معاقبتهم، نعم لا نريد معاقبتهم ولا الانتصار عليهم ولا خسارتهم. ولهذا فنحن بحاجة إلى الرواد الصادقين والفاعلين في مهارة التواصل والحوار والاستقطاب والإصلاح، وصولا إلى عالم يسوده السلام والمحبة والتفاهم تحت شعار الصداقة بين الأمم والشعوب. الحضور الكريم، لقد توسع أملنا نحو بناء الجسور بين الأمم والشعوب من خلال مبادرتنا الدولية التي أطلقناها من مقر الأمم المتحدة بنيويورك في يوليو 2023 بحضور قيادات الأمم المتحدة وعدد من ممثلي الدول الأعضاء في الأمم المتحدة وعدد من القادة الدينيين من بينهم الشيخ رباعي كان حاضرا معنا هناك، وعدد من القادة المفكرين ومراكز الأبحاث والفكر الدولية الشرقية والغربية، وذلك تحت عنوان بناء الجسور بين الشرق والغرب. هذه المبادرة التي واجهت نظرية خطرة تقول بحتمية الصدام والصراع الحضاري وتحديدا بين الشرق والغرب، وهي التي تم توظيفها مع الأسف في تصعيد كافة الحروب والنزاعات القائمة حاليا، والتي زاد بالله بها استدعاء نصوص دينية تم تشويهها بالتطرف في تأويلها. وعندما يتم التحدث عن جذور الحضارات وهوياتها العام، فإن الجانب الديني يأخذ فيها حيزا مهما، خاصة وأن أكثر من 80% من شعوب العالم اليوم ينتسبون إلى دين معين على اختلاف درجات التزامهم بالدين. أما حوالي 20% الباقين فتدرك أهمية الدين وتأثيره في وجدان أتباع الأديان. كونك تختلف مع الأديان بحيث تقبلها أو لا تقبلها أو تختار أن تكون ملحدا مثلا، هذا شيء. وكون الأديان مؤثرة في السلم والحروب والصداقة بين الأمم والشعوب عبر التاريخ الإنساني وحتى اليوم، فهذا شيء آخر. التأثير الديني في عالم الصراعات مهم جدا، وذلك أن التأثير الروحي مؤثر للغاية، بل إنه أشعل حروبا طويلة عبر التاريخ الإنساني. وقد قامت حرب 30 عاما في القرن ال17 التي مزقت أوروبا وحصلت الملايين لأسباب دينية. وحروب اليوم لا تخلو من أحد أمرين: أول كونها ذات جذور دينية، كان كما من نزاعات في مثلا في الشرق الأوسط ومأساة الروهينجا وغيرها من معاناة الأقليات حول العالم، وما تتعرض له من اضطهاد على أساس الدين أو المعتقد، التي أسست للوجه البشع للكراهية والتمييز العنصري، وما تبع ذلك من العنف البدني على الأفراد والجماعات. الثاني قيام قادة النزاعات السياسية بتوظيف الأديان لدعم موقفها السياسي، وهي الورقة الرابحة التي تكسب الولاءات الشعبية. فالجانب الروحي كما تعلمون لا يعدله شيء في قوة التأثير والتضحية. وإذا كنت في بيئتك لا ترى تأثيرا للدين، فغيرك في البيئات الأخرى وبالمليارات من البشر يرون له تأثيرا، بل والواقع المشاهد يشهد بذلك. لذا يتعين أن تنظر من كافة الزوايا وليس من زاويتك الخاصة أو بيئتك المحدودة. ولهذا سخرنا في رابطة العالم الإسلامي كل ما نستطيع من الجهد لمواجهة تلك التحديات، وحققنا مكاسب فاقت توقعاتنا الأولية، ولا نزال نعمل على تحقيق المزيد في هذا. ربما أختم بهذا: نرتكب أخطاء فادحة إذا تعاملنا مع عالمنا وفق نظرياتنا وقناعاتنا التي تتجاهل الواقع ولا تنظر لتأثيره مهما اختلفنا معه كلنا وبعضا. هناك فرق بين الحقيقة والواقع، وفرق آخر بين ما نريده وبين الحكمة في تحقيقه، مع أهمية أن ندرك بأننا لن نكون الحقيقة المطلقة، فلا أحد يحتكر الصواب ولا فضل القناعات، وإنما الحوار حولها. والعنف مع الآخرين لا يولد، سواء كان حسيا أو معنويا، لا يولد إلا عنفا مضادا. وفي المقابل فإن تجاهل الآخرين دون تقارب وحوار ودون نوايا حسنة لا يولد إلا بعدا وكراهية وتضليلا وسوء ظن. وللتاريخ البعيد والقريب مواعظ مؤلمة في هذا، ولا يزال عالمنا يستمع إلى دروسها، ولكن من يستفيد من هذه الدروس هو القليل مع الأسف. وشكرا لكم.
Thank you all so much for some incredibly powerful introductory remarks. Thank you all for really such powerful introductory remarks. And there seemed to me that there was there were a number of common threads, but there was a common thread for many of them around the need to work together rather than be split apart. And so I'd love to ask all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Nick, how can we use technology, how can we use communities to bring people together rather than divide them? Because we heard this morning about the incredible ability of technology to divide. So maybe, Nick, you might say a word about how technology might actually be used to bring people together, and then I will look to the other panelists. And again, please do send me your questions. I will pick them up as we go. Nick.
Let me first say something which is sort of unfashionable. I just don't think it's historically accurate to say that the technology that we have today is leading to unprecedented strife. Social mobility didn't exist with the rise of fascism in the 1930s. Social media didn't exist in the pogroms which happened throughout the history of Europe. Social media didn't exist in the ethnic and religious conflicts in the Balkans. Pol Pot didn't have social media. It justifies any reasonable reading of history to suggest that we have seen unique outbursts of vitriol, hatred, intercommunal strife in the social media age or the internet age. So I'm afraid I just unfashionably worry that we look for technology to provide solutions which emanate from problems which are fundamentally human. And I think history shows that. History shows that we are vile to each other and that people spout hatred at each other and victimize groups and vilify groups and scapegoat groups and massacre groups and inflict genocide one on the other, irrespective almost of the technology that exists at the time. And I just worry so much that these technologies are very powerful, the responsibility of the companies are profound, there is much more partnership that can be done. But as someone who's moved from 20 years in the world of politics and public life to about 7 years in Silicon Valley, there are two groups of people I've decided one should not listen to on the subject at all. It's the people who are the greatest proponents of technology and the greatest critics of technology, because they both make the same mistake. They try and reduce everything to technology. They try and confer a sort of techno-determinism on the way in which we behave. And I think it can lead to almost a comforting assumption that if only we can work with the technologies to fix something in technology, then all will be well in society. I'm afraid I don't think it's as simple as that. So on the partnership point, absolutely, of course, governments, religious leaders, regulators, technologists and so on. Certainly in my time in Silicon Valley, I was probably one of the leading proponents to try and get that divide, certainly between governments and technologists, to be bridged. Absolutely.
I'm just going to, I will come to you in a second, but I just want to double click, because I don't for a moment think you're saying that technology doesn't have a role in bringing people together. Of course not. So, and perhaps I can give you a moment to think about it, but how might technology be used to bring people together? So we're not talking about the two extremes, but I think to be honest, I think it does already, whether it's email, whether it's the telephone, whether it's the internet, whether it's social media. We human beings love, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's Telegram, whether it's, we love taking up technologies which allow us to express ourselves as human beings and to communicate, particularly with family and friends. We have an insatiable appetite as a species to do that, and I think that technology does that. The question, I believe, which is more complex, is how is it that at a time of technological globalization, which is in effect eliminated geography, eliminated distance, where physical distance makes no difference to our capability to communicate with each other, why is it at the same time that's coincided, or appears to have coincided, with what I call a cultural and political de-globalization, where politics everywhere in particular is moving towards us and them, and building barriers and vilifying the other. So it's this really weird irony that we've got technology which brings us together, and yet it's coincided, or maybe it's partly helped as a catalyst to cause this pulling apart. Okay, I think we're going to have to come back to that question of is there a causal relationship between those, because I think it's one of the key elements of this discussion, but please.
Yes, I wanted to comment on what you said, that people are evil, I think you said, or something like that, but let me just say, I think you have a very good point there, because I think that it's not technology that makes us do bad things to each other. It's like you say, we have always done that, and we believe that we need the grace of God because we are able to do a lot of evil things to each other. So it's not the technology that makes us evil. We need to nurture the good side of people. We need to have values, the great values. Like I said, we need to nurture faith and hope and love also in the digital arena, because we need our values to be really integrated in ourselves so that we can use them to judge what we are seeing and to build up what is important for us, to build bridges, to find each other's, and to be good to each other's. And I think that me myself has several times experienced that the digital arenas are bringing people together. Recently, I was actually leading a council of religious leaders in Europe, sitting in East Jerusalem, having 2 rabbis, 3 imams, Buddhists and Hinduists. It felt like we were in the same room, you know. We were online and we were having this talk about and trying to understand each other's. And even online, you can listen with big ears. You can use your clear mind, your strong forehead to try and understand what is the good solution here, and to keep your heart soft and be empathetic to the other. Because we need to understand that what can make people so angry and so violent to the other, and to look at the other as an enemy, often is grief and sorrow and frustration over things that has happened to you in your life, or you're watching other people which you are related to going through. So we need to have these hearts of stone turn into hearts of flesh and blood, so we can be empathetic to each other's and try and understand each other in a deep way, to build this fellowship that we in Norway in interfaith work often call the community of disagreement, a community of disagreement. We don't need to agree on everything, but we need to love each other.
Lovely expression.
Love.
Chief Rabbi, His Excellency, thoughts on how do we bring people together, as Sinek said, how do we bring people together when the technology on the one hand allows us to do it, but we're living in a moment which is pulling people apart?
So a few reflections. Instant communication has not created evil. In the very first family on earth, one sibling killed another. And you can't blame television or social media, not even the neighbors and not even the in-laws. However, instant communication makes the accessibility of evil far easier, and therefore it exacerbates that plague which does exist within our society. I have a lot of faith in human beings, a lot of faith in the goodness of human beings, and where there is evil, and when there is enjoyment when it comes to sadness and sorrow and murder, etc. I don't think that social media companies should be let off the hook with regard to the responsibility relating to being the vehicle through which such events might take place. You know, it's such a pity that we've all forgotten about COVID. God sent COVID to the world to teach us some extraordinarily important lessons. And because of our human capacity to be positive and to move on, we've pushed COVID behind us. COVID taught us that as far as the pandemic was concerned, there are no borders, no boundaries, no differentiation between different faiths and colour and gender. We were all put by God on one side, but we forgot all about that. And COVID highlighted how important instant communication can be to bring people together. That Zoom phenomenon kept us going. It did exist before, but thank God for Zoom, thank God for COVID to enable us to appreciate the good that can come out thanks to technology. So if we think more about our COVID experiences, I believe we can seriously invest in technology for a brighter future.
Thank you. His Excellency, you have a...
عندما نتحدث عن التكنولوجيا نتحدث عن جهاز، نتحدث عن جسد، لكن هذا الجهاز وهذا الجسد من يسير، من يحركه؟ هم البشر. وبالتالي لا نلوم الأجهزة. الأجهزة عندما نتحدث عن كائنات جامدة مبرمجة، من يبرمجها هم البشر، وبالتالي اللوم هنا والحديث هنا عن من يتداخل مع هذه الأجهزة. هذه الأجهزة أصبحت اليوم في غالبها دون محاسبة. فكما ذكرت في كلمتي قبل قليل، هذه الأجهزة أو بعض المتعاملين معها شوهوا القيمة الأخلاقية العالية للحريات. بالتالي أصبحت الحريات مطلقة، ليس هناك سياج أخلاقي يغطيها، وأيضا لم تكن هناك قوانين قوية ورادعة لأي إساءة من شأنها أن تضر بالآخرين. لا أتكلم عن الحريات، أتكلم عن الإساءة للآخرين. وعندما يكون هناك قيم أخلاقية عالية في الحوار من خلال هذه الأجهزة، قيم أخلاقية عالية يقترب الناس من بعضهم إلى بعض، ولكن عندما يتغاشقون بالكلمات السيئة وبالكراهية وبالتزوير وبالتضليل، فمن الطبيعي أن يبتعدوا عن بعض. بالتالي لابد أن يكون هناك سياج أخلاقي عالي هنا. ومن هنا أقول بأن الكلمة في الدين هي عبادة، والكلمة في مفهوم القيم هي رسالة، والكلمة في الفوضى الإلكترونية هي سلاح. وهنا الخطورة، ولهذا يجب أن يكون هناك تربية في المدرسة، في الأسرة، في المجتمع، في مؤسسات المجتمع المدني، من خلال برلمانات، سن التشريعات، المواعظ الدينية، أيضا المجالس الفكرية، الحوارات الوطنية لتتحدث عن مسؤولية الكلمة. هذه الأمور لا يمكن أن تعالج إلا بقيم متأصلة من الداخل ومن الصغر ينشأ عليها الجميع. يصعب أن أعطي دروسا في القيم لشخص بلغ 40 أو 50 سنة. لا أقول يستحيل، لا نتشائم، لكن يصعب ذلك. هذه القيم تنشأ من الصغر، نأخذها تلقائيا من اللاوعي، subconscious mind، في اللاوعي. يجب أن نفهم. وأيضا الحديث يجب أن يتجاوز النظريات، يجب أن يتجاوز مجرد المبادرات إلى الأعمال. نحن نريد أن نتجاوز هذا. We don't need just initiative. We need to initiate action. Yes.
Thank you. There are so many questions comments I want to pick up, but Bishop.
No, I just wanted to comment on the fact that on the issue that what is dangerous with social media is what we are talking about all through the day, actually, that the algorithmics, it tends to bring you into narrower arenas, you know, so you meet the ones you agree with. And what we need is to get out of that and to meet the ones that are different from us. And that's sort of the problem, that you are being leaded into an arena where you only meet people who have the same opinions as you have yourselves, and you don't get other opinions into your life. Yeah, I think that's part of the problem with the social media, actually.
So let me pick up that point and something that you said, Chief Rabbi. I'm hearing everybody say that it's humans behind it, right? That we as humans need to take responsibility. But I also heard you say, yes, but technology needs to take some responsibility as well. And so let me bring that back, picking up on your point as well, Bishop. How can, from somebody who's been on the inside of technology, is technological companies taking enough responsibility? What else could they be doing that would pick up Bishop Carey's point about bringing different voices together rather than diverging them?
So I think there are certain aspects of this which how can I put it? The sort of the cat's out of the bag. The issue of scale that Chief Rabbi talked about is very important. The internet has created a scale of a sort of public square which we as human beings have never had to deal with before. Chief Rabbi said so. I think you can, with a press of a button, just literally have something flying around the world, and it can be seen potentially by millions and billions of people. That has never happened before. We have never had the capacity as human beings to be individual publishers, individual content creators, with potentially a dizzying access to. I don't believe that is something. I think that is almost inherent in the sort of accidental, but nonetheless clear design of the modern internet. I mean, actually, I'm publishing a book about this in the autumn. I think there are other trends towards a fragmentation, towards a balkanized splinternet, but that's a different subject. But I think that scale, virality and distribution, I don't see that. I think that is a real dilemma for us, and I think that can be very overwhelming to people. I think that can be very intimidating to people. I think it can be very exhilarating to people. But I'm not sure there's any one company that can switch that off, because I think that's part of the scale of connectivity which we have in the online world. Conversely, how these platforms choose to distribute content, in other words, what content goes to which people and in what way, that is of course subject to a great deal of different policies and engineering and algorithmic ranking systems and so on. And honestly, the difference between the companies now is almost more striking than similarities. So if you look at the way that X and TikTok and Facebook now share content, they are worlds apart. They're completely different. Some have a much sort of more developed approach to guardrails and swim lanes and transparency. Others, it's much more of a free-for-all. They're also used by very different people. So, for instance, X generally is used basically by elites, people, journalists, people in politics. It's quite a small app. People like us use X. People use these bigger apps on a much more societal level for different purposes. So I know only because I worked there, I left some time ago, but the vast majority of content on Facebook has nothing to do with current affairs or news. I think news is now less than 3% of the total. Most people, it's about their daughter's football game, their holiday snaps, and you name it. Anyway, so I think the connectivity is something which is probably kind of just part of the modern world, and it's got a lot of different dilemmas, and the virality and distribution, and the ability of people now to become self-publishers. I kind of don't see that, but I think how content is distributed and shared, that is an enormous discretion for the companies, yes.
So I'm going to come back to you as a former politician as well as a former tech employee, if we can, and say, okay, so what would you do differently now to put more guide rails on it for the future? But let me come back. One of the words that was used in the second panel was principles. What are the principles that we can agree upon? You've used the word values. You've all used that word. Are there principles or values that the people sitting on this stage can agree upon as a starting point for moving this conversation forward?
I'd use the word responsibility. I think everybody needs to be responsible. The 19th century great Jewish rabbi, Rabbi Strauss said, "Not everything I think I should say, and not everything I say I should write, and not everything I write I should publish." And he was talking about publishing books. Today, I just press a button and I'm a publisher. And I don't think. And I'm sure we've all got stories of people who pressed and then immediately regressed and take the words back. So we need to act in a responsible way, bearing in mind the very significant impact on our words. The companies, I believe, have the greatest responsibility in this respect, because they are partners to everything that goes out, and they need to show I believe, far greater sensitivity to the potential for damage. A lot is happening which is good, and I've heard about many valiant attempts by companies to introduce formulae to oversee, but I do believe more should be done.
I want to come to you, Bishop Gary. Before you answer, there's a question here that I really wanted to also direct to everybody, but particularly at you, because it's something that we've spoken about. How can religious leaders support their communities dealing psychologically with the enormous tensions in polarizations? So also, you've talked, when we were talking earlier, a lot about communities and the role of communities. So I don't know whether you can say a word on that as well.
I'll try to answer that. I think that responsibility is a very good word to bring in here, that we need to be responsible. And I think that when we're discussing this now, we tend to part real life from life online life. But what I think we should do more is to bring values from real life into the online life, and that we need as communities and fellowships to nurture the meeting between people, so that you see the other person and you look into the other person's eyes and you feel responsible for their life too, not only for me. And I think that what we need to open our eyes and see is that the me first, make me great again, is what very many people are living up to. That's the greatest value. At least here in Norway, you seek very much that you seek your own wellness, you seek to be rich, to be famous and everything. And we need to turn that around, that you want to nurture other people, be responsible for the fellowship. And we have to do that in small places, in our small communities, in our holy houses, to make people feel responsible for others, and then to bring that out in the bigger communities, in the society, and also online. And I agree with you that the tech companies should be held accountable and feel more responsible. And I think I will bring in again that we need the hearts of stones to be turned into hearts of flesh and blood, filled with love for the other, because if the leaders of these big tech companies felt responsible for everyone else, I think things will change a lot.
إذا فرقنا بين المسؤولية والقيم، فإن المسؤولية تحتاج قانون تشريعات. أما القيم فهي لا تحتاج قانون ولا تشريعات، تحتاج نوع أخلاق ينشأ عليها الشخص، يتفاعل معها تلقائيا. ولهذا تجد من يتمتع من لديه هذه القيم يضغط على قلبه قبل أن يضغط على إنترنت ليرسل الرسالة. أما إذا فرقنا بين المسؤولية والقيم، فقط المسؤولية، فلا ينظر إلى المادة، ما هو نص المادة وكيف يتخلص من المادة ويتحايل على هذه المادة القانونية. وبالتالي الرهان الأكبر الكبير هو على القيم. لكن ما هي القيم؟ يأتي سؤال: ما هي القيم؟ من هي؟ هل هي قيم دينية؟ القيم في وطنية؟ قيم إنسانية مشتركة؟ من يضعها؟ أنا أقول الجميع يضعها. الجميع عليه مسؤولية. في المجتمعات الوطنية عليها مسؤولية، تضع تشريعات، تضع الضمير الرقمي، ضمير رقمي، تضع يدرس في المدارس، يعلم في الأسرة. الأمم المتحدة يصدر عنها ذلك. يكون هناك مسؤولية تضامنية، هنا مسؤولية تضامنية في تعزيز هذه القيم، وهي قيم متنوعة، لكنها بمجموعها هناك قيم مشتركة تجمع هذه القيم. هذه القيم المشتركة هي تمثل القانون الإنساني الطبيعي، ولا بد أن يسود هذا. بدون سيادة هذا القانون الطبيعي بقيمه المشتركة، بقيمه الوطنية، بمسؤوليته القانونية، سوف نتحدث عن هذه القضية forever، إلى الأبد، لن نصل إلى نتيجة.
Let me just stay with the three of you, if I could, for a moment. Because you've all asked technology companies to take responsibility. can you just, each of you, maybe take 30 seconds to say, what is it that you would ask of technology companies? And then I want to come to you.
I can cite one specific example, because you asked, what are our values? I believe this sounds quite controversial. Freedom of speech. Freedom of speech should not be viewed as a religion, without any exception. Freedom of speech is one of the greatest values of all of our society. Let's uphold and champion. But there have to be some exceptions to freedom of speech. Let us engage in a debate as to what those exceptions should be in order that we should be responsible.
I think I would bring attention to the protection of children, actually. I think that is one of the really big problems on the digital arena, that children are being exposed to images and films that they shouldn't see, but also that they are being abused. And they are more vulnerable than many of adults are. And toxic content can bring them into toxic milieux where they are being abused in different ways. So what I really want the tech companies to find a solution, a technical solution to, is how to keep the children away from web pages and social media they really shouldn't engage to. So to protect the most vulnerable people among us, the children, is what I really, really want them to do.
Thank you. Excellency.
يمكن أن ننصح شركات التقنية بأن تتعامل مع المستهدف هو الإنسان، تتعامل معه كإنسان، لا تتعامل معه كمادة، وتحصل على المادة لكن لا تغفل الجانب الإنساني. الجانب الآخر في التعامل مع هذه الشركات هي أن يكون لها مدونة أخلاقية تعلنها للجميع وتطلب من الجميع مشاركتها، أن يشارك الجميع في هذه المدونة في تعديلها أو الإضافة عليها، أن يكون المستهدفون مشاركين في صياغة مدونة أخلاقية ثم تلتزم بهذه المدونة الأخلاقية لنعطي للجميع ونخلق ضميرا رقميا حيا يتمتع بمسؤولية وأخلاق.
Thank you, and I'm going to come to you, Nick, for the final word, as it were, today on this conversation, which is, what would you see tech companies do with religious leaders? Who are going to move the ball forward? What kind of collaboration do you think is possible, would you like to see?
I probably would, I'm not sure if it's the tech companies and religious leaders, but I think in the sort of spirit of wider societal partnership, I probably would focus on three areas. One, His Excellency Chief Rabbi Bishop, all of course, rightly talked about personal responsibility, corporate responsibility, but there's another slightly more opaque but important characteristic which I think we need to we really need to strengthen, and it often has a negative connotation, but I think it should. I'm trying to project this in a positive way. We need to promote skepticism. We need to promote profound skepticism about what we see online. I'm afraid I am extremely skeptical that a long tweak here, a policy change there, a regulatory provision here, a document there. The internet is such a, I cannot exaggerate to you how, but you know, it is so vast. The idea that we can find a global consensus on exactly where the line should be drawn. This debate between free speech and not free speech, it's as old as the hills. One person's free speech is another person's hate speech. I work for the world's largest social media company. You wouldn't believe it. I would come to places like Scandinavia, and I'm not exaggerating. I'd be berated by not here in Oslo, but in other parts of Scandinavia. I remember getting berated by a Scandinavian minister for the prudish standards of Facebook, not allowing topless photos on Facebook. You then go to India, and I would be berated by ministers there about caste-related content. The problem is, free speech is not an objective thing. It is highly driven by culturally specific determinations. So that is why I worry a little bit that we're trying to sort of find a fix, whereas what we need, and I think the Chief Rabbi mentioned this, we need to educate young people to be exceptionally resilient and smart and sceptical. Actually, skepticism, oddly enough, is one of our greatest societal defences from what we're going to have to deal with, particularly in the era of generative AI. Secondly, I couldn't agree more strongly enough with the Bishop. I think the companies, I think societies, I think governments, I think legislators, we have a special duty to young people, to people who are not yet adults, and I think there's a whole lot more we could do there. I could go off with we should have a whole separate session about this. I think that the tech companies, for instance, could now cooperate together to make sure that every time a youngster, aged 15, 16, whatever you want to put the cut-off date, tries to download an app, they can only do so with parental permission. And that can be done through industrial cooperation between the platforms and doesn't currently exist. It's ridiculous. That should happen. And then the third thing, just to sort of go back to my theme, I think if we are now going to enter into an era where the blurred line between synthetic and non-synthetic content is going to be as blurred as it is. I have to say, I was really surprised. I lived through, last year was the year where more elections took place around the world than at any time since the dawn of democracy. And I have to say, sitting as I was at that time in Silicon Valley, overseeing the teams that were dealing in Meta's case with how to handle elections around the world, I was really braced for generative AI to play a big and disruptive role. And on the whole, it was oddly enough the sort of dog that didn't bark. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. It will be used for nefarious purposes. Deepfakes will disrupt elections. And I personally have come to the view is we should devote our focus in partnership on how we can authenticate authentic content going forward, rather than try and play whack-a-mole with the whole range of often innocuous to less innocuous synthetic content which is going to prevail on the internet.
I think you mean critical thinking.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic place to finish for now. I do hope that this conversation, perhaps not in this forum or this format, will continue on. It's an important one. I think I took away maybe 2 or 3 things really important. The first is the responsibility of us as humans. And I started this conversation of asking you all to ask yourself over the course of the day, what can you do, think, feel differently? And what I've heard today is the importance of us all asking that question and taking that responsibility rather than expecting another. I've also heard the echo that came up this morning of the importance of all of us to have critical thinking and to help our children have critical thinking, to be a little sceptical to what happens. The other thing I heard was the importance of values. Whether you use the word values or principles or ethics, can we find a common set that can guide us? So with that, let me, I hope, join you all in thanking an incredible panel for coming up and joining us for such an important conversation. And just the 4 of you on this stage is such an important message. So I hope that goes viral. So thank you, please. I'll allow the conversation to go on a couple of extra minutes because we did start late, but please be back in here at 3 o'clock for the final really important conversation with the young leaders. Thank you all.